Welcome to the Pretty Intense podcast. If you would please do me a favor and take a second and hit the subscribe button. That means so much to me and the whole team who put in a lot of effort to make these shows, to get great guests and keep bringing the truth to you. So please hit subscribe. Today's show is with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. She is a board certified family medicine and fellowship trained physician in nutritional science and geriatrics. I've been watching Gabrielle on YouTube for years, for at least 2 years, maybe 3 years. She just brings so much knowledge about this sort of protein conundrum. I went through my own phases of not knowing, do we really need protein? How much protein should we have? What does it do? She explains just why it's so important, how to build it, how to maintain it. It's just great information that I think everyone needs to hear. This is the stuff of longevity. This is how you stay healthy for a long, long time. So your function at 80 is still quality. Gabrielle has a book coming out in October called Forever Strong. She knows so much about how to keep skeletal muscle, how to make it, how to maintain it, and the benefits of it, as well as the fact that she is just a cool, badass woman. I really think you're going to enjoy this episode. Well, I'm glad that we're finally doing this.
Oh my gosh, I know.
I've been listening to your stuff for years. Like, I feel like I looked back because I wanted to see like what the timeline was of. I felt like you just hadn't really popped yet, like in a way that you have in the last year or so, I'd say. And then I look back, I'm like, yeah, man, the YouTube videos with Dawn were the ones that I watched. I feel like it was you and Dawn most of the time.
Yeah.
And, it was like 3 years ago, basically. I feel like YouTube, because I watch everything on YouTube. I'm a YouTube guru.
I love it. I love it. I love that you say that. I've been really working hard to try to get this message out there. And I've just been waiting for people to catch up and just waiting, this can have the potential to shift the paradigm just of how we do things. And, Don is a world-class expert. And that's actually, I dedicated my book to him. This is taking all the research from bench to bedside, and this could change the trajectory of people's lives. So I'm so glad that you watch his videos and that you like it. And he's in his mid-70s.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you had to wait for the vegan flame to burn out a little bit.
I'm sure it will circle back. The truth
it's like fashion.
I'm sure it will circle back. I did this TEDx talk, and for 8 minutes, it's an 8-minute talk. So the TEDx, maybe it's 10 minutes. I submitted 52 references for 8 minutes, and they flagged it for being outside of guidelines, whether they felt like it wasn't scientifically sound or any of these other things. But what was so interesting, in the same frame, they are promoting a CEO of a meatless company that wants to replace meat with mushrooms, and talking about the impact of cattle on the world, or the impact of cattle on our climate in the US. And it's not true. I'm talking about being strong, and I'm talking about how are we going to maintain the health of our skeletal muscle? How are we going to be stronger, better humans? And how that potentially could change the way people experience aging and health.
I have my moment with not eating animal meat. I ate fish. I totally got sucked in. I watched What the Health, and I was like, oh shit. It's rocking my meat eating world, because I love meat. I mean, short ribs, steak, chicken, all of it. Like, you name it, pork chops, and I was like, well, I feel bad. I guess I should just not contribute to the problem then. Like, the masses are the voice, right? So if I just stop buying it, they'll stop putting it on the shelf. And so I kind of went through this little phase. It was like 2017, end of 17. And then that lasted for a couple of years, where I only really ate fish at night, rarely ate steak, and really didn't eat any.
How did you feel?
Terrible. Like, I had way less energy. I mean, with a cascade of problems to come from that point on, basically. Yeah. Like, I lost my whole body and whole well-being at about 2020. It was finally time. And through stress, and it's never just one thing, but that was one of them. And I think for sure one definite effect is I had heavy metal poisoning.
Oh, interesting.
So, because then on top of eating all the fish with the mercury, is that I now was consuming plant protein for my like additional protein, because I was still trying to eat protein, but I would have pea protein. And they say that those kinds of proteins are any kind of plant basically absorbs the metals. And so now I have more metals from that too. And, my mercury level is supposed to be under 5, and it was 170,
Oh
like
my
I
God.
was.
I've actually never seen anything that high, and I take care of war fighters. So that is exponentially high.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm all behind you on this whole strong meat, lean muscle mass, like all of it, because that was also, I mean, I gained weight. My body wasn't the same. But I always knew I felt so much better on animal meat.
And I commend you for being able to speak out on that, because in the narrative and in the environment that we live in, it's kind of like social media has taken over, and it's very damaging to people's health and wellness, right? So you had this experience where you got on this kick, and luckily you're able to vocalize it. And again, I don't think that we should only be eating meat, and I don't think that we should only be eating plants, but we can't demonize something that helped develop our brains, that helped develop our bodies. It doesn't make sense in the way in which they're painting animal products in general. And it seems as if there's no advocacy for it, but it seems as if this constant discussion about how we should go more plant-based is really going to affect women and children. It's going to affect our military, and it's going to affect our aging population. And that's a problem. And
I don't see who it doesn't affect. Like you're naming things. I don't see who it doesn't affect.
Well, when we have conversations about Meatless Monday, and when we have government institutionalized decision-making, the unintended consequences of that, where other people can make their own decisions. But for example, if my child goes to school and they tell her that they're going to have Meatless Monday, what kind of effect is that going to have over the long term for her? It's not going to be great. And it also poisons her way of thinking about things.
Yeah. There's a whole lot of institutional rules in the world that are highly questionable these days, especially for children, which I do want to talk about kids at a little bit later on. Protein being the topic right now. What are you seeing are the main reasons to consume protein, and what are the upsides, downsides? Like, frame up your vegan for me as your meat eater.
Okay. Dietary protein is, unfortunately, or I suppose fortunately now, the most controversial macronutrient. It's probably been that way. But, I've been studying for this for 20 years, and it wasn't 10 years ago. It wasn't really controversial, right? So you had these groups of vegan, vegetarian, and it was happening, but it's still a very small percentage of the population, 2% or less of the population. But dietary protein, as it relates now, has gotten much more controversial, likely because it has a face, because it relates to animal welfare. It has a face. It just is very emotional for people.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the broad topics will just say protein. So there's plant protein, there's animal protein. Protein is made up of 20 different amino acids, 9 of which are essential. These amino acids all have dual roles in the body. It can't just be collectively discussed as protein, which it is, by the way, but actually there's 20 different amino acids in various amounts that make up one individual protein source. That's really underappreciated. What we're going to see, it's something called the EAA9 is going to come out. And that is a way in which we think about each one of those amino acids as individual nutrients, which is fascinating. We've never talked about it before. We have only looked at dietary protein as it relates to this is plant protein and this is animal protein. But the reality is each of those individual amino acids have its own need. And it's
they usually come in clumps though, right? It's usually like these ones come with this and these ones come with that. It's not like you pick specifically big, well, I better get an ounce of fish, of salmon, and an ounce of bison, and an ounce of, it's kind of like clumped into different categories, but it's obviously being analyzed on an individual level now. And I'm wondering what the cascade effect is with our supplementation.
I think that's a very intelligent point, is that why have we come to this place? If individuals were eating a combination nutrition plan where they're eating both animals and plants, probably way less of an issue. But because of the influence of this plant-based nutrition ideology, we are not meeting some of these individual amino acids. And while on the short term, Is it an issue? Probably not. But long-term, we don't know the potential downstream effects. Not just talking about muscle health. We're talking about all these other things.
Cognitive, hormones, sleep.
Exactly. Over time, certain amino acids help with gut intestinal lining. Other amino acids help.
My gut was a mess too, just to make sure we cover that base, of course. Dysbiosis, leaky gut. It was a wrap.
But also you're a high level athlete, and we do see, I take care of athletes in my own personal practice. And it's interesting, the higher an individual goes in their sport, it's not, people think, oh, these athletes and being at the top is really healthy. It doesn't totally go like that, because you do have to, you're laughing, it's true, is there are certain things that there's a give and take. To be at the top of your field is not necessarily in alignment with health, but hopefully there are seasons to it, right? So there's the repair and rebuild season, there's the push season, and you take the off season to recover. So, but anyway, these individual amino acids, when we think about what we need, we go through protein turnover, your gut, your hair, your skin, your nails, your entire body system. Roughly.
Yeah, that went to shit too.
I mean, look at you now.
Oh my God, my hair was terrible, just terrible.
And look at you now, total babe, right? Completely all together. So dietary protein helps with protein turnover. Protein turnover is happening all the time. As we age, we have this inability to keep up. We've all seen this with our parents. Perhaps their skeletal muscle goes down. They have all kinds of low levels of inflammation that ultimately we see over time. And then when we think about why protein is important, is it's essential. Carbohydrates you can make. The need of essential fatty acids, super small, but you cannot replace dietary protein. You have to eat it.
Yeah.
One way or another, you have to eat it.
The make would be trying to do like a Impossible Burger or whatever, or
the make would be for 100 grams of protein, you'll generate 60 grams of glucose. You don't have to eat carbohydrates. Your body can make it.
Yeah. If you eat lean enough meats, you will get, I wore a CGM, and the only thing that doesn't spike your blood sugar is fat. So your body's obviously converting some of the protein.
Protein does cause a phase 2 insulin release. There's the phase 1 from carbohydrates, which is pretty robust. And then there's the second phase of preformed insulin, and your body will release insulin. So absolutely. But the reality is the amount of essential fatty acids that you need is not that much, but you do need dietary protein. And in fact, the average protein intake for an individual in the US, for a woman in the US, is around between 60 and 70 grams a day.
I've been counting, and I know portions and macros like pretty well.
How much protein are you eating?
About 130 a day. I weigh about 115-ish, and I would eat more protein. I'd like to, but I'm also trying to get enough. This is another topic, is complex carbohydrates and carbohydrates in general. I used to not eat them, but I do think that it had a bit of an issue with my thyroid and my hormones. But when I see people eating, and they'll be like, oh, I'm so full. And I'm looking at what they just ate, and I just know. And I'm like, you ate lettuce and half of your chicken. I know you're not full. You just ate about, 190 or 200 calories. Like I'm like, I know you didn't, your dressing's on the side. Like I look at this, but women, I feel like they look at meat and they just think if I eat it, I'm going to just turn into like the Hulk or something.
Yeah, these are, it is very common, that and lifting weights. Between that and lifting weights, women, for some reason, it's just a total disservice. It's very hard to put on skeletal muscle. And
it's very hard.
I know.
It's so hard.
I agree.
I know you're super ripped. Like I know you lift weights like crazy.
I do. And I'm also really tiny. I'm about 108 pounds, by the way.
Yeah. And you're 5'1", so am I.
Are you really?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
We become best friends.
Yes.
Yeah. That's hilarious. So yeah, you have to train. You have to train and you have to eat, and it's not easy. You have to create a stimulus so that you can put on muscle. And for women, oftentimes they think that salad and eating very light and they're going to be doing walking and that's great. And yoga and Pilates, all of that is great. But I really think if we care about long-term metabolic health, strength, body composition, then you do have to lift, because it doesn't get easier, right? So you want to protect what you have while you have it. It doesn't get easier.
So when you have more skeletal muscle, what are the biological benefits of that? Like, we know the physiological, like you look at someone and you can like literally see shape in them, beautiful, but what are the biological benefits?
When you have healthy skeletal muscle, there's healthy skeletal muscle and there's unhealthy skeletal muscle.
What?
Yeah. Are you ready?
You can be ripped and be unhealthy skeletal muscle?
Probably not. Probably not. But unhealthy skeletal muscle is when we think about a marbled steak. When we think about obesity, it's not just that there's fat on the body, but we talk about visceral fat, which is fat over the organs, but there's also fat in and around skeletal muscle. That would be considered unhealthy skeletal muscle.
Okay.
You also can have indications of unhealthy skeletal muscle if you are young, lean, and sedentary. You don't have to be overweight to have unhealthy skeletal muscle. You can simply be sedentary. Some of the early works of this came out of Yale. I think it was Kit Peterson's lab, where they showed 18-year-old college students, young, healthy, not overweight, lean, but showing signs of insulin resistance, all because skeletal muscle is unhealthy.
Being sedentary is what
unhealthy.
Is what creates the so it's saying that you have muscle and fat then.
Yes. And what happens is when we think about skeletal muscle, it really is an organ and it really is about locomotion and movement. When it is static, think about a pool or a pond that you don't drain the water and you don't recycle the water. It just gets low levels of inflammation, stagnation, all of the things. I mean, obviously a pond doesn't get low levels of inflammation, but your body maintain healthy skeletal muscle, you have to go through flux. You have to empty the proverbial tank.
Okay. The glucose then?
Exactly.
Okay. You got to dump the glucose. You got to use
acids, triglycerides. Yes, you have to utilize these sources of energy.
So you're saying that it truly is like the marbled steak. It's the marbled steak. So there's too much fat in the muscle. It's the marbled steak.
Yes. Fat in and around skeletal muscle is not good. Healthy skeletal muscle, number one, skeletal muscle is an organ system. Take this right off the table. It is not your skin. Skin is not the largest organ. Skeletal muscle, 40 some percent. Danica and I don't know, we're probably 50% muscle. 50% muscle. So for everybody else who's 40%, Danica and I, we're like, all 5 foot.
We don't have a lot more space.
I mean, like, come on. So when you think about skeletal muscle and how do you build and maintain healthy skeletal muscle, well, what does it do? Number one, metabolic currency, which I've talked a lot about, which if you've watched any of those lectures with Don, metabolic sync, glycogen disposal. It's where you move, right? Fatty acid oxidation. Okay, obviously. Body armor. We know if you fall, if you get cancer, if there's some kind of catabolic crises, this is what you are going to use to protect yourself. Going through periods of starvation. Yes, you'll use adipose tissue. Yes, you'll use skeletal muscle. Really important for mobility and strength. Also important for the secretion of myokines, which we've
heard a lot more about in the last few years.
Which we have, right? I've been talking about this forever. But it's interesting because it's not easy, nor is it routinely measured in clinical practice. I mean, we were looking at interleukin 6 and it's very difficult to correlate some of these things because it's so new, especially in the US. They're doing a lot in Copenhagen, but in the US, it takes a long time. It takes about 17 years for the information in the research to come into clinical practice. It just takes time.
We got to move. Okay.
I don't know how we're going to do it. That's why I'm done.
Let's go. Yeah,
Italy. Listen, I'm with you. But it takes a lot of time. So skeletal muscle, when you contract skeletal muscle, it does release myokines. Myokines, for example, interleukin 6 is a big one as it relates to balancing inflammation, lowering systemic inflammation, helps with nutrient partitioning, meaning how do we utilize fats and glucose. It stimulates BDNF in the brain for neurogenesis, memory, cognition, 300 plus different myokines.
I think one of my favorite effects of muscle is just being able to eat more, probably for me at this age. Maybe when I'm 60 and then 80, I'll be happy for other reasons. But, the metabolic effect of muscle, I think, is really important. I think if most women knew that the more muscle mass that they could put on, essentially, if healthy, lean muscle mass, then, they would be out of their 1,200 calorie prison.
And the more mitochondria you generate.
Yeah, which is also super important. I mean, I do things to upregulate my mitochondria. I take pills for it. I do red light.
That's right. I'm just curious, what kind of pill are you taking for it?
It's have you ever heard of a guy named Kashif Khan? He has the DNA company.
Oh, I do.
Yeah,
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 totally.
Kashif's great. I met him a couple of years ago, and he was doing genetic testing on women that were getting explants on some common factors with women that that needed them out and that were sick from them. So that's how we started. But it's one of his mitochondrial pills from his. I'd have to look and see what the ingredients are. But yeah.
I'm very interested in. I've been using a lot of urolithin A. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. It's just, it's so interesting the way that it impacts mitophagy and mitochondrial regulation. It's almost, if you can leverage it, it improves endurance and strength. Yeah.
Dang.
Super cool.
Sounds like a good one. Add it to the list. I mean, there was a point in time I was probably eating 30 or 40 pills a day when I was deep in the gut rehab and the whole dysbiosis, and God, I don't miss those days. Well, there are obviously so many great features to protein. To close the loop a little bit on protein itself, or I should say animal protein, is it possible for someone to not eat animal protein and be able to like really truly achieve the highest level of health that could be achieved through animal protein? Is it really possible? I feel like everyone wants to say it is, but I don't really know.
I'm going to give you an evidence-based answer. I'm going to tell you some of the flaws and the difficulties with answering that question. The evidence would support if you're young and training and you're getting dietary protein, whether it is from plant or animal, you could do either or. That's just for a muscle mass and strength standpoint. There aren't long-term studies that are controlled that we know of. It just doesn't exist. Professionally, I do not believe that that is possible. I think that we have to really think about food as a food matrix. I don't know, you could supplement creatine, you could supplement taurine, but it's almost the same thing as saying, well, I don't really need to eat fruits and vegetables or phytonutrients as long as I'm getting it in a pill. I think it would be impossible to do all of that. I also believe that animal-based proteins are rich. It's not even that I believe, they are highly bioavailable. But your original question is, could someone reach the optimal level of health without eating animal products? I think professionally, I'm not sure how someone would do that.
Right. Well, you see patients. I mean, anecdotally, you can use your own generated experience to say, no, it didn't work.
Since 2006. I've been seeing patients, and I do not believe, I think on the surface, we can maintain skeletal muscle mass, but long-term, you got to think about iron deficiencies. People would have to take iron pills, probably would benefit from taking creatine, certain B vitamins, zinc. It would be a lot, a heavy burden. And even then, again, the magic about food is eating the whole thing in a food matrix. We're not trying to eat a bunch of powders or make it so we're going to be like how the future is we're probably just going to be eating a bunch of elemental type nutrition plans, which is scary.
What about, there's been, in life, you go through life and people get sick and they get cancer or whatever. And, what have you seen in your experience and from the literature about diet wise, what's the best for people in those positions where they're unwell, whether it's cancer or some sort of disease? Because I've seen so much varying degrees of approach to it. You said the whole food is important, and there's plenty of people I know that have done juice, and it's like, just, I wonder for myself, if it happened to me, what would I do? Because like I think we relate, my like aggressive, like blunt brain goes, you just fucking eat meat. That's it. Or starve. Like you starve it out of you, or you just eat meat, but that alkaline environment isn't going to be available anymore, or I'm going to make it alkaline. So, but I think if I was in the position, I'd wonder.
I think that there's a couple ways to approach this. Number one, is there evidence that methionine restriction, which is one of the amino acids, would help with potentially chemotherapy? So methionine is deficient in, like a vegan diet would be a low methionine diet. So it's very low in plants. It's a limiting amino acid. It's high and available in animal products. I will say that there is some evidence to suggest that if somebody has cancer, again, it probably depends on the type of cancer. I was just
Yeah. This is general. Yeah.
I was looking at this literature because I'm super fascinated in the individual nutrients. And so with methionine restriction, is there a potential to improve chemotherapy outcomes and to, quote, starve cancer because they seem to feed off of methionine? Again, it depends on the cancer. I think that there is some benefit. But then there are other cancers where people talk about a ketogenic diet. Ketogenic diet would be 70+% fat.
Mm-hmm.
Would be different than potentially this lower methionine diet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's multiple ways in which one would approach it. I would also say that on the flip side, one of the things that kills people with cancer is cancer cachexia. And that's a highly metabolic process that destroys skeletal muscle. So then the question becomes, where are you on survivability? Cancer cachexia patients do better with protein and exercise. Again, it is, where are you in disease progression? Are you at the point where you're doing chemotherapy? Are you at the point where you need to protect skeletal muscle, which everybody is? And how do you navigate those things? And I also think that protein does not cause cancer.
Yeah. Right.
Or do I think that red meat causes cancer? One of when you hear these things, you have to ask, well, what is the mechanism of action? Why would this conversation be that red meat seems to be worse for you than smoking? Think about it. Red meat in mainstream media, red meat is killing the planet, causing cancer. I don't know, you name it, probably red meat is responsible for the next 5 things. Smoking doesn't even do that. That's fascinating.
Right.
So ask yourself,
just lung cancer.
Right. So you have to ask yourself, so what is the mechanism of action? And people will say the mechanism of action is this complex called mTOR, mechanistic target of rapamycin. But that is not a cancer initiation factor. What it is it's a growth promoter. It's a protein kinase, and it's important. It's in all cells in the body, and it's important for growth. It's in muscle and liver and pancreas. And by the way, when you push mTOR pathways, it's not just protein that pushes it. It's excess calories, carbohydrates, it's all these other things. So
it's like a building mechanism then?
It's responsible for muscle protein synthesis. Yeah, it is. I think that's a great way to think about it. It is that is a good way to think about it. So that is the way that people will talk about protein and cancer, red meat, cancer, but it doesn't hold up because it just doesn't hold up.
On to carbohydrates, because it's been one of those things that, I've looped around about too. Of course, I had my moment with protein. I'm like, maybe it's just a myth that we need protein. Yeah, don't worry. I really thought that for a second, because I was like, maybe it's just propaganda. The narrative is got to eat your protein. So with carbohydrates, I didn't go carbohydrate free, but I was only consuming them through squashes, and I was paleo for 7+ years. No grains, no beans, fruits, squashes, some potatoes, but very little complex carbohydrate in the nature of rice and oats and various different things like that. But at the beginning of the year, I started having it again, and I lowered my fat and increased my carbohydrate, which I get can be an energy exchange of like, this will give you more ready energy throughout the day. But I just generally, like, my body responded, and it was a really positive thing. And I just wonder too how much damage I did to my thyroid while I was in this protein hole, or I should say protein and fat hole.
Well, first of all, you feel great and you look great, right? So I would say you probably didn't do damage, and your diet sounds just like my diet.
Oh, I did damage. No, my thyroid. I don't even know if the numbers are up. I don't even know if I should trust the numbers because they have not come up in 2 years. But
also, we don't just treat off labs. If you are feeling good, I mean, granted, if your TSH is super high, then that's an issue. But, depending on what your baseline is, you have to really think about how you feel. And that's where the art of medicine comes in. I think that I know that the body is incredibly capable at healing itself. It wants to be in homeostasis. It wants to be better. If you give it the tools to be better, it wants to be better. Yeah. So I don't believe that you did any inherent damage, truly. I think that we test more than we ever have. Many women have low thyroid. It's just for whatever reason. Maybe it's an iodine issue. Maybe it's that we're just testing more. Who knows?
I had so many tests done the last couple of years, everything from, all my blood work for leaky gut and stool samples. That's the most humbling thing anyone's ever done. I mean, pooping in, oh my God, scooping your own poop is just
man.
the worst.
I mean,
it's just the worst.
I'm not going to do the test I sent you.
You sent me a test.
I'm gonna send
If you tell me to do it, I'll do it. Like, I am a good patient. Blood test for everything. And, on another note, my mom has gone through various different sort of health issues. And the most recent one was I think it's called the CA-125, which is a cancer marker for ovarian. And it was elevated. It was like right on the cusp, and then it jumped. And so she was very scared. Well, she went in, she had surgery, had her ovaries removed, and they did they tested while they first initially did sort of a wash, I guess. And they take samples and they test to see she had no cancer. And there was absolutely no issues whatsoever. They cannot explain the CA-125 number, but trust me, I'm over in Europe praying in every single church that I go into, which is everywhere. And I mean, unless it was the prayers that just magically vanished, made what they saw vanish, but they're like, they saw something. They're like, there's nothing there. We have no idea. We can't explain your numbers. And so my mom was curious too, because I always ask people I'm around, I'm like, hey, do you have any questions? And she's like, I'm curious what the legitimacy of testing really is, because whether it's my thyroid numbers never coming up, no matter how much T3, T4, supplemental T3 through the day I take, or my mom's CA-125, it's like, maybe if you tested, everyone would have stuff wrong with them.
I believe that is a really good point. When it comes to cancer, there's two things that I typically would recommend: full body MRI and something called the Gallery test or the Grail test. And it looks for multiple different cancers that we don't have ways to do early cancer detection. And then once you get those results, you compare it to the MRI and you have an appropriate workup. It's something that we use for military operators. Again, something we use in the practice. Hunter 7, I don't know if you've heard of them, have been using it for our soldiers so that there's early cancer detection. And that's what I typically recommend. And then, of course, keeping up to date on your colonoscopy and your mammogram, if you need it, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Beyond that, so would you take all testing with a grain of salt then? Because, does it feel completely conclusive? To elaborate more on my own labs, I never felt that bad. Like with my mercury that high, as well as 5 other metals, with, mold, with low thyroid, with hormones in the tank. My cortisol was spiking in the middle of the night. My whole hormonal profile was flipped. I mean, just low testosterone, low estrogen, low progesterone. I mean, you name it. That's what all the testing showed. And do I feel remarkably different than then? No, I felt fine then. I feel fine now.
I also want to point out something. It's interesting. There are individuals that have a threshold for capacity that's exponentially higher. And we have to believe and know that you are one of those individuals. Whether if I were to replace how you felt then and put your brain on someone else's body, you might have felt like a 2 out of 10. But again, there is a capacity and a certain kind of resilience that some people have. We see it with the SEAL teams. We see it with individuals that are going through BUDS or just military operators. There are certain groups of people and certain individuals that it doesn't matter how bad their labs look. They don't acknowledge, there's kind of a disconnect between how they feel and their ability to just perform and execute. And that's the truth.
Mental strength.
But also, I think you're probably also born like that. You probably would say, okay, if I'm tired or I don't feel like it, I'm still going to okay.
And actually now I'd say, the other day I came home, my friend and sister went up to the CrossFit games. We got home. I was like, oh, I'm going to go work out. I got a lift. It's a Monday. We drove home Monday and Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Let's go. And I was about ready to go. And I was like, Mom, I'm really tired. I'm like, I'm just not going to I'll go tomorrow. And I actually listen to a small cue now. If I get a small cue of I'm tired or I'm exhausted or I'm hungry, I I just follow it. And this is the frustrating, this is the path of health that I have come to realize, at least for myself, is that, and even with talking with people, is that I can ask you, what should I do? And you're like, well, I need a lot more information and we need to test it on you. Like, everybody is different. There is definitely baseline information and generalities, but when it comes down to the micro differences between people about what time of day to eat, how much carbohydrate, it's like, what kind of food, it's like, does it agree with you or not? I mean, I didn't eat eggs for like 8 years because it said it was super reactive and created more leaky gut for me. And it was the saddest thing in the world because I loved eggs, but I started eating them at the beginning of the year and I eat them every day and I have no problem.
And that's where you have to understand certain tests are validated and certain tests are not validated. Food sensitivity tests are typically non-validated tests. They are usually come up positive with things that people have been eating. If they have impaired gut integrity, those kinds of things, just to really take things with a grain of salt and look at the big picture. That being said, there are some core fundamental things that everyone should do. That would be, when you think about it, circadian rhythm is really important, being consistent at the times you eat, the times you wake, being outside. I do think that dietary protein is a foundation for 95% of all people, because there's evidence to support that as it relates to evidence to support skeletal muscle, these protein turnovers, all the other things that happen in the body. And also, we know that certain people can tolerate more carbohydrates than others, and really refining and defining what that is. The next layer to that, by the way, Danica, is who is the person and what is the archetype in front of you? You will always do better if I give you something that is going to create a challenge for you. You are never going to be the kind of patient that is going to be like, I'm so good, I'm just going to relax, like I'm just going to skate through. That's never going to go with you. Like, it's just
me because you know you.
It's true. It's true. So that's never going to work for you. If I say, all right, Danica, we've got this nutrition plan. The next thing that we're adding in is we're going to be doing cold plunge. We're going to be doing cold plunge until you feel really uncomfortable. And then we're going to do that, that, and that. And then you'll start to, as we start to escalate the challenge, you will begin to do better. But you are never the type of person that is going to be okay with, okay, I'm good, I'm just going to coast at this.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a key to understanding who is the person in front of you and what is their archetype. Where do they function? Where is their domain of functioning?
A lot of times when people work with a lot of patients, especially because patients come with problems, and even it could be clients, as far as like trying to achieve something better, you really are able to, psychology wise, you can identify people very quickly. Like, that's probably pretty easy for you within the first couple minutes.
Yeah, because then you leverage the person to get the best out of themselves. I tend to take care of hard chargers.
Yeah.
I know exactly where their weaknesses are. I know exactly where their strengths are and how we're going to leverage them. And I know when they're going to get bored and when they're going to fall off. I mean, it's so predictable. It's like so predictable.
Probably because we're a computer simulation and we just follow like this certain code. We're a certain archetype, but either way, it still works.
It works and it's super predictable. And I would say if someone's listening to this and they're like, well, what kind of archetype am I? I would say the first thing that you need to do is figure out where your weaknesses are. We don't care where your strengths are. Where are the weaknesses in which you are going to fall off? What are the actions you need to do to become the person that you wish to be? And what is the health behavior? What are the health behaviors that need to be imparted upon that individual?
Yeah. Great advice. So what do we do to build muscle? We've talked about consuming dietary protein. What do we do to actually build muscle?
And this is the good news is it's not rocket science, right? It's how are you going to create enough volume, enough stimulus, enough progressive overload to build healthy skeletal muscle. There's multiple ways to do it, but you are going to have some kind of resistance. And again, it could be body weight resistance up into a certain point. I personally think weights are an easy way to go. It could be free weights, it could be machines, it could be kettlebells, you name it. But what you're really looking for is not a modality. You're looking for a stimulus. You could get 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week, however you want to do it. But you do have to create enough volume for a stimulus for the outcome of skeletal muscle. You do need calories, you need dietary protein, and you need stimulus. And then, of course, rest and recovery.
What would you say to I mean, I feel like guys do a much better job of this. They'll probably try and always grab bigger weights than what they really should probably have, but women tend to grab lighter weights than what they really should have. So what would be your verbal cues to help direct them to the kind of weight that they should be lifting?
This is interesting because the evidence would suggest that someone could do lighter weight and still get the stimulus. But I would say that really cheats you mentally. How are you also going to build mental resilience and build confidence? Confidence is built in the arena, doing things that you haven't done before to prove to yourself that you are capable. And that is why I typically suggest women either get with a trainer. There's tons of I have online workouts, right? I put together this whole video, a whole video series, by the way, which took days to film for my book, to show you proper ways to lift, proper mechanics, ways in which you can stress the system to create an adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
While I can sit here and tell you you can lift lighter weights to get a stimulus, yes, you can. I think the better way to potentially do that is to tax the system, to lift, obviously with good form, heavier weights.
But if you're using a lightweight, you can't just keep using 10s, right? Because that's not creating a signal to adapt. It's just the same signal over and over again. So if you grab 10s, then grab 12s, then grab 15s, like that would be the point, right? Perfect. You can't just keep grabbing the lightweight. You would have to continue to increase.
I mean, you could, but you might be doing 100 reps.
Got it. So
this time you might be doing 120 reps, but after a period of time, that's a lot of time.
Yep. Exactly.
Maybe other ways, more efficient and effective ways to leverage that.
Okay. And then with protein timing, if we can kind of take it one level further, is there certain protein timing that helps with the building of muscle?
No, for the most part, no.
Really?
No.
Fantastic.
I mean, get it in within a 24-hour period. I'll say when I think about protein timing, it's not necessarily about muscle, but how do we build a nutrition plan that will take us forward to maintain optimal body composition? How do we build a plan that allows us to lose body fat? Obviously, you care about calories, but the way I would design a plan is I would front load dietary protein, 40 to 50 grams the first meal, 40 to 50 grams at that last meal. And then for you, you're at 130 grams of protein. That middle meal could be 30 grams of protein. That's how I would distribute your protein, so that you optimize, again, for muscle protein synthesis, you balance blood sugar, you are priming the tissue, it's able to sense all of the amino acids, you're overcoming any kind of nutrient sensing resistance. And then at the end of the day, 4 hours from bedtime, right? We're keeping on some kind of circadian clock. You have your other 40 to 50 grams of dietary protein. That's how I would design it. And wherever you work out, in that area, in that time frame, as long as it's consistent, I'm good with.
Cool.
But for your mom, I would have her consume protein after she trains. She's a little bit older. We'll say that she's more mature. If an individual is a little bit older, again, does the 24-hour amount of protein, that full day of protein, matter? But when you're a little bit older, there may be some benefit to optimizing dietary protein after you train, because there is more blood flow, the tissue is primed for nutrients. It could potentially be a good strategy.
I heard Don say in something I was listening to about, as you get older, you don't need as many calories. And I'm really curious about that because, my understanding is that muscle costs calories. And so as you get older, you generally would be less movement, probably a little bit more sedentary, and you probably have less muscle mass. So I would say that seems like the conclusion in my understanding to caloric needs more than just like age itself.
Yes. I would say age in and of itself, there's some evidence to suggest that potentially we become more insulin resistant. I would say if an individual is highly physically active, then it doesn't really matter the age, but we don't have a lot of studies that support very active individuals throughout their life. The majority of older individuals are very sedentary.
Yeah, exactly. That's what would explain it for me, which is incentive to stay active and keep your skeletal muscle.
It's the tissue you can really do something about, and it will protect you as you age. And it's not as if it's not as if age in and of itself changes everything. The activity goes down. Potentially appetite goes down, but we don't know what really active. There's not a huge data set of very highly active individuals that we're studying.
I want to answer this curiosity about blood sugar and things now that have been introduced like Ozempic to increase insulin. If we become more insulin resistant, these sort of things help bring blood sugar down and make you less hungry, various different things. But I wore a CGM, and my idea was like, oh, I don't want to increase my blood sugar ever, right? So I do whatever it takes. But then, other people I've spoken to, they're like, no, it's healthy to have, if you eat and blood sugar comes up, comes down. If it doesn't come down, that's a problem. But this is a normal physiological reaction to food. So is blood sugar going up? Obviously, we don't want 400. That's a problem. But, spikes in blood sugar and coming down, is that a problem, or does that actually wear out the mechanism of insulin coming in to bring it down? And then kind of speaking to this Ozempic craze that we're in, and, what it really is doing, the upsides, the downsides.
The variability in blood sugar there's some component to it's normal. High levels of variability is not ideal. I'm talking about high levels of variability. When blood sugar gets too high, that is the definition of diabetes. However, maintaining your blood sugar is supposed to go up a little bit. Even if you eat protein, your blood sugar will go up a little bit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The idea that I think a bigger issue is when we utilize insulin, which insulin is a hormone produced from the pancreas that moves glucose out of the bloodstream into cells. When we are constantly using insulin as a fail-safe mechanism to move blood glucose out, I don't think that's ideal. How would someone do that? If someone was having a very robust amount of carbohydrates or glucose, then you subsequently will produce insulin or release insulin. And those kind of swings, because then after that, potentially your blood sugar can drop. Those kinds of swings are not ideal, because when blood sugar goes too low, then you have an increase in catecholamines, all kinds of catecholamines and just other hormones that can disrupt this homeostasis over time. Mm-hmm. So that's one thought. But yes, there is variability in blood sugar. Mm-hmm. And with that being said, the blood sugar is maintained, it's tightly regulated. You're not getting major ebbs and flows. It's pretty steady, right? Maybe your blood sugar is 85 all day long until you eat. It goes up a little bit, comes back down, and then it maintains at 85. But it shouldn't go up to 300 and then down to 60. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Large swings are not ideal. Mm-hmm. The second component to that question that you had asked me was Ozempic, the GLP-1 agonist, or trizepatide, which Mounjaro is a GIP-1 agonist. I have never seen anything work better in my entire medical career.
Is it only that you are less hungry? Because if it was only about discipline, I got that. I fasted 24, 36, 18 for a whole week. I didn't lose a single pound. Like I can do and I dislike being hungry and fasting. It's not my thing. Although I'm always willing to try everything. So what else is at play that makes this work? Because it's remarkable.
It does slow down gastric emptying which is what it's supposed to do. I know there's a lot of conversation about, oh, this is creating gastroparesis and all of these other things. Well, it's kind of doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, I did see that.
But okay, again, as a practicing physician, I've never seen anything work better. Overall, I think that we tolerate a much higher body fat than we should. I think that this drug has exponential benefits. I have seen it work wonders for individuals with binge eating disorder or dysregulated eating patterns. I've seen it really cut alcohol cravings. There's some mechanism.
I'll take it. No, I'm just kidding. That was just for Europe, where I drink wine like every day.
Oh man, but you're home now. There's some evidence to suggest that it browns fat.
Oh, that's good. That's the function of cold plunging, turning white fat cells into brown fat cells, which burn at a higher metabolic rate. So that would be a help.
So there are different mechanisms. And of course, it affects hunger, improves insulin sensitivity. I do think that it is of great benefit. I think it's of great benefit when used appropriately.
What is like a minimum kind of run that you do with it? Like, would you say, hey, would you say 3 months and get off, 6 months and get off? Is this something people can be on for years?
It is. And it really depends on the person. I have many patients that are taking it at not even a therapeutic dose, very, very low dose. I have had other patients that don't lose weight until they get up to therapeutic dose of, say, Mounjaro or trizepatide. Some people lose the weights, come off of it, and they don't actually regain the weight. There's a lot of discussion saying that you have to be on it forever. I haven't seen that in clinical practice. And they also talk about how you lose lean body mass. If you are eating dietary protein and you are resistance training, in my clinic, we don't see people lose lean body mass.
That's why I'm sure that you don't, because I know how important dietary protein and strength training is. So that's what I've heard, is that people, you eat less, but then they have so few calories and they're not making sure that they keep their macros in check to maintain their lean muscle mass. And they do lose it. I saw something that was like the half of the weight they lose is muscle.
You don't want that. And it's preventable. And it means that your dose is probably too high. And I've looked for a mechanism of action to say, what is Ozempic doing? Why? How is it impacting the pathways of skeletal muscle? I haven't seen that. I haven't been able to find, again, we have to think, if something is being repeated, then what is the mechanism of action as to why it is happening? And is it directly related to the drug, or is it directly related to actions above and beyond the drug? For example, starving, not eating, and not training. I have not been able, and maybe by the time this episode comes out, there'll be some way in which there's some mechanism of action, but I haven't seen it.
So that's good for longevity for people. And, when people, the thing is too, it's a cascade effect. Once the people lose weight and they start to feel better, then they start to act better too. I'd like to have a chat about kids. And like, we've obviously talked so much about dietary protein but how to take care of kids.
You want to borrow mine?
Yeah, I want to borrow yours? Sure. Look, I swing them in circles. We go ride 4-wheelers. We craft, we make bracelets. And then I also tend to also give some deep life lessons that I don't know if they land, but they're somewhere deep in the subconscious. There was one little thing, I'll tell this funny story. It was my sister's kids, and they're out riding their bike, and they're creative. So they put rockets on their bicycle and they take off, and she's able to take off. The other daughter got the bike and she wanted rockets. And I was like, no, I don't have any rockets left. So I'm like, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And I'm like, so all you have to do is believe that I put a rocket on. And so one time I did it, but I didn't do it. And I faked it. I was like, all right, there you go. Your rocket's on. She took off. And I was like, Jordan, I got to tell you something. I didn't put a rocket on. And she's like, what? I'm like, I told you, if all you had to do is believe there was a rocket on and then you go fast. These are the games I play.
Mine are on their way to your house now.
That's awesome. That's great. My sister has 4 kids, so they'll be highly entertained with me and all them. Do you think that there is influence on biological hormones?
I do. There are a lot of things within the environment that potentially can disrupt the endocrine system, for sure.
What do we do about that?
I'm not sure. I mean, the best thing that people can do is, try to eat whole foods, do the best that individuals can, try to limit exposures to plastics and endocrine disruptors.
Yeah.
That is the best and only thing that I think that individuals can do. But it's challenging. Yeah. It is definitely challenging.
Interesting. It seems confusing. It seems surprising. And just can't help but think of that there are so many things in the world that are poisoning us, and especially in the nature of food, them trying to genetically engineer food. And
I think that it's very challenging. And I think it's very hard on kids. It's very hard on parents. I think that there's a lot of certainly endocrine disruptors in the environment that we're in.
Well, thank you very much. That's such great advice. Gosh, if you're not ready to eat dietary protein now, I'm not sure what you need, but
well, they have to. I strongly suggest people read my book, Forever Strong. It took 2 years to write, and it's very evidence-based, and it talks a lot about the influence of food. So it'll tell people exactly what they need to know to how to live in the best version of their body. But what it also does is there's also information about the history of how we hear about food. And that's very fascinating, about the budgets of these, you're talking about Monsanto and some of these companies. It talks about the history of some of these things.
Well, how's the food pyramid developed? Who decides on the food pyramid?
A social experiment that went wrong. That was a complete disaster.
Is it a social experiment?
Well, I mean, not totally, but
I guess everything is kind of.
Yeah. So that was a failure. But anyway, the book talks about some of the history of some of these things.
Got it. Well, what would your food pyramid be then?
I'm a dietary protein and fruits and vegetables kind of girl. And I'll throw in some complex carbs. I would say I'm very balanced. High quality protein and fruits and vegetables. And
what's an example of your breakfast, lunch, and dinner? I don't even know if you eat 3 times, 1 time, 5 times.
3 times. This morning, the kids, we all had Greek burgers. We had burgers and raspberries for breakfast. And I put some yellow potatoes on there, which they are now smashed into the upstairs. And then they had a keeper.
You're sending your kids my way.
That's why. Go to Auntie's house. Get out of here.
ATD.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
So that's what they had.
Lunch?
Pack them some salmon, some cucumbers, some avocado. I mean, so they eat healthy, whole foods.
Do they just eat the same thing
on the way out of school? And then on the way out of school, they're going to grab a bag of Cheez-Its that is going to be sitting at the counter. No matter how many times I tell them not to grab this at their school, they have this big, so that's what's going to happen.
If you control 90% of what goes into their mouth, they are far better off. I mean, I grew up, before we had a lot of knowledge, right? It's like, beef stroganoff and, instant potatoes sometimes. And, we know better now. Well, thank you very much. Congrats on your book. I want to check that out. I love learning about the history of that stuff.
Yeah. I'm going to send you a copy. People can go to my website, drgabriellelyon.com. I have a ton of free stuff that we're giving away with a pre-order for the book, workout videos, all kinds of things. We're actually going to have an in-person event in January, which I'd love to have you at if you would like to come in Austin. It'd be so fun. And I could put you on the podcast at the same time.
Let's go.
Even so
I need to go do an Austin loop. There's so many people that live in Austin.
Time to rock and roll, girlfriend.
Yeah.
January.
Well, I'll actually be there in late October for the F1 race.
Okay. You tell me, I'll be there.
All right. Cool.
I'll bring my kids. So they can find it there. And on my podcast, I have a podcast, which you are going to have to be on, the Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show. Find me on Instagram, Twitter, newsletter, recipe books, all on my website.
Awesome. When's the book come out?
October 17th.
October 17th. Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Go get the book.
All right, my friend. Thanks for having me.
Thanks everybody for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.